I want to welcome everyone today. My name is Tamra Pearson, and I'm a professor of conflict resolution at the University of Denver's Joseph Corbell School of International Studies here in Denver, Colorado, where it's 10 a.m. And so I say good morning and good afternoon to many of you, and good evening as well. We're very lucky today to be having with us a very dear colleague of mine from Cyprus, Maria Hadjipavlou, and she'll be talking to us today. Let me go ahead and do a bit of an introduction, and then we'll hear from her for about 40 minutes, and then have a bit of Q&A, and we'll have a discussion, respond, and then have Q&A after that. So do take notes of your questions, and we'll have plenty of time to have a conversation after Maria is done speaking. So again, Maria Hadjipavlou is in the Department of Political Science, Social and Political Sciences, at the University of Cyprus. She was actually the first to introduce gender courses and conflict resolution courses into her department, and she's been a member as well of the Program on International Conflict Analysis and Resolution, or PCAR, at Harvard University, where she worked with our common mentor, Herbert Kellman, about whom many of us have integrated aspects into these presentations and this book. For over 4 decades, Maria has promoted reconciliation and peace and gender equality across the divides in Cyprus. Her book, Women and Change in Cyprus, Feminisms and Gender in Conflict, was published in 2010 and is used widely as a reference in Cyprus. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce her and to turn it over for us to hear from you about building peace infrastructure in Cyprus.
Thank you, Tamra. Thank you, my beloved colleague and friend. And we had shared experiences, in Cambridge a number of times and years. Yes, I have 40 minutes, I know. So I made my notes here so I don't go all over because I tend to do that. So I will start, as we say in feminism, by locating myself, my positioning. As you all probably know, I come from a deeply divided society. I come from a protracted, intractable conflict for the last 50 years for the Greek Cypriots and 60 years for the Turkish Cypriots. There has been no mutually acceptable solution. So the division, which started and was in 63, actually, the first division of the island, and that was solidified in 1974, in July 74. So this means that I am a product also of different and competing narratives from both sides. So what did I want to do with these competing narratives, and how this impacted later my work? I'm also what I call myself an insider-outsider. An outsider, inside because I come from the place, I experienced situations there, but also I'm an outsider in the sense that I have lived abroad for a number of years, 14, 15 years. And so this gave me the opportunity to view my home situation, not only, Ronald Heifetz would say, from the dance floor, but also from above, from the balcony. So in these two perspectives have really been very much part of my worldview. Now, when I started my PhD at Boston University in the Department of Political Science, I found it very narrow into what I had experienced in Cyprus, especially about the refugees, their identity, the displacement, the uprootedness, and their own stories, and the impact of the conflict directly on them. So I was very interested on the macro level, on the individual story as well. So, but the political science courses I was taking was not really responding to this need that I had, and I wanted to explore further. So in 1983, I was passing by Le Monde Library in at Harvard Square, and I saw a poster announcing a meeting between Knesset members and PLO members. And coming from Cyprus and the Mediterranean, I thought, my goodness, the terrorists are here, you know, PLO, how it was perceived by the Americans and other people. So I inquired and I asked if I could attend this meeting. I was lucky, I did it. And this was a breakthrough completely in my search for a meaning and also for a way to integrate what I wanted to do later in my thesis. So what I saw happening in the room, which was facilitated by Herbert Kellman, I didn't know who he was at that time, nothing, and Nadim Rouhana. I ran and I embraced Kellman and I said, thank you, this is what I want to do in Cyprus. And that's how I met Kellman. And after that, you know, a year later, yes, I was a participant in a full-fledged interactive problem-solving approach, which the State Department did for Cypriot, non-elite Cypriots in the United States. And there I experienced the actual workshop phases and stages. And I remember that I was pregnant at that time with my first child, I would go out of the room every 10 minutes because I couldn't bear that the Turkish Cypriot participants could not understand my trauma, my loss of space, my memories that I left behind because we come from the north, the occupied area. And so I had to deal with a lot of this pain of not being understood and listened to, appreciated, etc. So when the Turkish Cypriots started narrating their story and their pain and so on, that immediately shifted in me a very big space that, hey, here we are really facing together much of the grievances and pain that the one didn't know about the other. Because in the official stories in the media and narratives, they never expose the other's pain of victimhood and so on. So after that, I wanted to understand more theoretically. I took Kellman's graduate course, and that's when, you know, I became, after that, very involved in conflict resolutions. And my PhD thesis, Kellman was one of my readers, which was on identity conflict in divided societies. And why some society, and I asked the question, why some multi-ethnic societies reached stability and others did not. So I took 4 societies and I tried to understand those factors that contributed, on the one hand, stability, and on the other hand, continuous instability, like Lebanon and Cyprus. And I looked at Singapore and Switzerland, the other 2 cases. And that's when I developed my linkage approach. the dialogic relationship between macro and micro levels. And Kelman helped me a lot in, sort of fleshing that out in the thesis as well. So why I'm saying this, and what is the value of the personal narrative? Because those who've read the chapter, I start with two and later some more of the vignettes or people's own narratives or stories or responses to the experience of interactive problem solving or of meeting the other. So because I believe that the personal narratives actually are, as we say also in feminism, the personal is political. The personal narrative is part also of the collective narrative. And as Brunner told us, they constitute part of the collective experience, which in turn comes to reinforce and distribute the person's knowledge of the story, his or her truth, in an attempt to help a community make sense of the complex world and of itself, more than just an act of self-presentation, as Kaufman described. The personal narrative or story is also a political praxis, which can legitimate other forms of reality. I think this is very important in the case of Cyprus, because we are all exposed into the official selective narratives, which really prevent us from seeing this complexity and multiple realities, especially of extraordinary events that have different interpretations. And as such, the personal narratives, as these unfolded in many of the conflict resolution interactive problem solving workshops that we use this tool, raise questions also about power, about knowledge, ideology, and truth, or as I say, multiple truths. In addition, the personal narratives, as I already mentioned, is political. And through this lens, it makes my story public. Okay, so like in the personal is political of the second wave of feminism, where issues of domestic violence became political because we needed to address this in our legal system, etc., etc. I won't go into these processes. So through this process, what I have experienced and witnessed is a new community that is often created, but this time is not through mediated information, but through direct personal information and contact and experience with the other, the perceived enemy. The official monocommunal pronouncements and dominant exclusive narratives are thus challenged. They become more complex, but also the intra-differences within each community are revealed, okay? And of course, when we did this, when we started this work, which means we break the binary us and them, and we complicate that, and we see that in us is also the them, and in them there's the us, and many more processes and identities. This was not to the liking of the official leaders. So we had a lot of resistance from the beginning. So it was really at that time in the 90s and 20s, taking a big risk because we were telling the way that history was written, events were interpreted, they were half-truths, and we needed to know the whole truth and all its complexity, and also to understand that on the other side, as Kelman would say, there are people with whom I can work with, and I can reach out to develop new ideas and join the projects and options, etc. So theoretically, what did we use in Cyprus to carry out this work? Of course, we used the contact theory, we used all the underpinnings of the social psychological approach to understanding the individual and the groups as unit of analysis, and issues also of perception, misperception, ethnic stereotypes, the victimhood, reconciliation, and all the concepts that we are all familiar with, acknowledgement and with apology and etc. Also literature on reconciliation. And at the same time, we used, in my last work, I use and I integrate a lot of the feminist understanding also of conflict, how men and women experience the situation in Cyprus and in other situations, look now in Gaza and so on, differently, and etc. So I want now to, let me see, a personal story. So our work actually focused on how do we transform a conflict system into a peace system, or into a system where we open up spaces for people to get to know the other, to collaborate, but at the same time to produce political new ideas regarding the future solution. And this means, how do we develop also a culture for a solution? Because usually, you know, in conflict systems, the one side is so wrapped up in its own justice and its own rights that they are not really aware what this exclusion would mean for the other, even in statements. So the other aspect we analyzed was what does the concept of reconciliation mean in Cyprus, in a divided society like Cyprus. And for this, we did a very extensive bicommunal research where we talked to non-political elites, you know, academics, journalists, former members of parliament, writers, etc. And we found that reconciliation, as it was used, for instance, in South Africa or in Rwanda or in other places, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, did not really appeal to the Cypriots. First of all, they felt that the local situation is very different. And second, they wanted some intervention to grow organically from below and to really address what the urgencies are in Cyprus. And one of them has to do with how we deal with the past, which is part of a process, which is part of a multi-track, in a way, interventions or points of entry into the conflict system. And we use the multi-track actually in our training. So bringing together people from business, people from religion, people from various areas, etc. So reconciliation was at the level of the societal level, at the institutional level, and at the macro level, at the leadership level. And many of them felt that an apology was very important, a mutual acknowledgement from both leaders for the wrongdoings to each other, which has not happened yet in Cyprus, and not also a very public, and also empathy building. How do we feel the pain of the other? So in other words, what this research showed us was that we need to engage in processes, and it's a process that it's both a product, a process, and something that should begin before, during, and after a solution, because as Tudu told us, it's a long-term process and it might take generations. And in Cyprus, we are now in the third generation. So I will give now some examples, of the different interventions, which demonstrate both the processes and the work of Kelman, but at the same time of the linkage approach. What happens in a conflict environment when the macro level, the decision, the leaders who are involved in the official negotiations, etc., and their teams come down to the grassroots, to the societal level, and the societal level reaches up to them. Okay, what happens in this space that opens up with their dialogic, in a way, process, and how this builds up a conducive environment for negotiations to begin. So I give him in the chapter the example of the two leaders of 2015 up to 2017, when a new leader was elected in the Turkish Cypriot community. I must here stress that every time we have a change of leadership, there is also a reconsideration of what happened before, sometimes no continuity, and sometimes regression, and sometimes they start from the beginning, or the one side says, we start from where we left, and the other side would say, but no, we didn't agree on that, so we need to revisit other. So in other words, deadlock. Okay, so right now in 2024, this is where we are, in a big deadlock. So in 2015 to 2017, there was a euphoria in Cyprus that a new hope and a new optimism prevailed, and that, both leaders committed to really moving forward towards the solution. And how was this done? Also, many of the third parties that I had interviewed at that time, they told me, today the leaders want a solution, and there is a genuine disposition to negotiate. This was told to me by a former Attorney General, but also by the diplomatic community, and I have their codes here and so on. And also the elected leaders, for instance, the Turkish Cypriot leader would make statements like, it is important for the two communities to understand each other and help each other, because we are not enemies, but partners for the future. This is the first time, that a leader so clearly stated what the relationship should be at the table. We are partners here. We are not enemies. Whereas all the previous experiences that we as citizens have had was that they go into the negotiation room, each one with their suitcase, and wondering and suspicious of what the other is bringing, so there was never this kind of lexicon, of wording and so on. And then Anastasiades responds to this by saying, now we negotiate in a spirit of mutual respect. So in other words, they bring in, the asymmetry that we faced before, majority, minority. In a way, it's being reframed into mutual respect. So, and the other thing was that they addressed each other with their first names. They walked in the streets, main streets, they crossed to the other side. This was after the opening of the checkpoints, so we could cross from north to south and south to north, and people also collaborating, etc. The other thing that was very important, and this is, I think, where Kelman taught me a lot about, is that the Turkish Cypriot leader on the 20th of July, 1974, is a day of mourning, when very sad occasion for the Greek Cypriot is the Turkish invasion, where 1/3 of the population was displaced, Greek Cypriots, and the losses, etc. But for the Turkish Cypriots, okay, at the official level, it's a day of joy. It's a day of celebration, and it's a peace operation. So invasion, peace operation, okay? And it's a day for them that they felt free, away from the oppression or subjugation from Greek Cypriots, fanatics especially, etc. And on that day, Erdogan came to Cyprus. So there were all these parades and so. And what did Akinci say on that day? We call it the peace operation, but it was a war, he said, addressing the Greek Cypriots and his community as well. And the events were undoubtedly difficult and cruel. Some of us lost their lives. Some of us lost loved ones. Homes were destroyed. Families were displaced and separated. Communities lost their cohesion, and thousands were forced to leave the trauma of refugeehood. And this was published in all Greek Cypriot newspapers. This is my translation from Greek. And also it was on the radio, So what did this mean? It was a big deconstruction of the enemy image there, and also of the courage that the leader of the other side came to acknowledge, what happened on that day, and also acknowledge that this was not an easy day for his community as well. So many more examples of their narratives and going to theater together, walking and sitting with So what do we learn from this kind of interventions in conflict cultures? I think the people immediately and the atmosphere at our bicommunal peace work and peace building projects and so on immediately took off and was very productive, producing immediately, new things and new ideas, new collaborations, etc. And they felt that the leaders were really listening to them. So it was an example of where the leadership comes to acknowledge the contribution of civil society to the bigger peace-building processes. Now, another thing that was very important and that we were asking from below was the confidence-building measures, which meant how the two leaders had the power to really make the daily life, the everyday life of citizens more easy on both sides, and especially their interactions and in building new relationships of coexistence. So they did listen to these needs, and they came up with a list of confidence-building measures, the two leaders, which they announced, and one of them, which we were very badly in need, was that we needed more crossing points, along the green line, so people could cross much more easily, but without all these long delays, standing in big lines. So that was, and after that announcement, 4 new crossing points opened during those years. And also the connection of electricity on both sides, because in the north, the electricity comes from Turkey. So while I would be speaking or working on internet with my Turkish Cypriot colleague, there would be a cut of electricity. So this was something that the South, the Greek Cypriot Electricity Authority, could provide. So that was another aspect that, made people's life easier. But, okay, also unification of the mobile. If I wanted to speak to my Turkish Cypriot friend, I would call international, go via Turkey, and then come to my call to the South. Whereas, from having a new telephone line, a common, it cost me only 5 cents, 50 cents if I spoke half an hour or half an hour or more. Whereas if I call via Turkey, which many people were discouraged to do, okay, from the Greek Cypriot, why should we pay Turkey, and this was something else. So the other aspect was the establishment of a gender equality committee, which I was appointed as one of the members, which consisted of 8 Turkish Cypriots and 8 Greek Cypriots, 6 women from each side and 2 men from each side. So we were 14 people, and we produced a lot of work during this period for the negotiators, how to integrate a gender perspective in the peace processes, in all the issues that were being discussed at the table. Max, you tell me about time, right? How many minutes?
Tamra, you're the moderator, but you're totally fine.
I'm fine? Okay.
Yeah. So at least 10 minutes if you like.
5 or 10 minutes, yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so
10 minutes is fine.
Oh, great. The other committee that was very important, is very crucial for us in Cyprus, as you know, in many conflict societies, is education. So a bicommunal technical committee on education was also formed, established at that time, and they've been doing amazing work and revisiting the textbooks and developing, especially history textbooks, and integrating each side stories and interpretations and events and so on. And the other committee that did a lot of work on bringing the two cultures together was the establishment of a technical committee on culture. which again brought together the arts and the theater. And so these confidence-building measures really were received with great enthusiasm from the peace-building communities and from many political parties. Of course, it's everywhere. There are the spoilers, and there are those who are against such measures or in such activities. And because they, in their view, there is no problem at the societal level. The problem is international, violation of international law. Therefore, it's Turkish intransigence. And the people, once they are left alone, they will find it very easy to coexist as they did hundreds of years before. So that was something that, in their view, what was happening in those years and still now is considered to be a threat. In other words, of devaluing the international aspect of the problem. And we are saying the problem is also a societal problem. As Kelman said, the conflict does not concern only the diplomatic level and the states, but also the societies themselves, the individuals who are daily impacted by this anomaly and this situation, etc. So this was something that we had to reckon with as peace-building communities. I mean, myself, I was very often called a traitor. I was very often investigated for my patriotic ethics and things like that, and at the university, etc. So you take a risk when you do this work, where there is really this very intense nationalistic, patriarchal, and militaristic culture where the one comes to reinforce the other. So that was not easy. But, you know, gradually, I think we built, as I say in my chapter, a human infrastructure that is there ready to work and continue the work. Now, where are we today? So 3 minutes, and then I will finish with some of the art and poets creations. Today, I think, is the time, since there are no negotiations and the UN Secretary General has sent his personal envoy here, Holguín, Maria Holguín, who was former foreign minister of Colombia, and she's aware of conflict and so on. She's paid a number of visits now on the island. She's leaving tomorrow. But unfortunately, what we are facing today are two competing positions. The Turkish Cypriot leadership and Ankara are talking the federation, and a federal arrangement is dead. And the Turkish Cypriot leadership and Ankara insist on a two-state solution, which means partition of the island, which means separate sovereignty. And this is an anathema for the Greek Cypriots. The Greek Cypriots are, you know, sticking to their position of a bicommunal, bizonal federation, which was agreed since the 1975 guiding lines, and with all the UN resolutions, European Union, and so on. So we can discuss a little bit, if you are anybody interested, also what it meant, the entering the European Union, Cyprus, as a divided society, you know, and not as a whole island, etc. So finally, I want to finish by giving one or two examples. I forgot to mention that although Cyprus is never had a religious lens to the problem. There was, at this time that I'm describing this euphoria of the 3 years and so on, an interreligious track with the Archbishop, with the Mufti, you know, the Muslim leaders, the Latin, the Armenian, and the Maronite bishops. And they met with the leaders. They made good statements at that time on reconciliation and peace building. They even wanted to know about the gender inequalities, and they invited some of us to talk to them and about human rights or women's rights, etc. So that was something that, and it's still going on. I mean, not as much as before. So I think one other shift in people's perceptions was in 2003. I go a little back now, when the checkpoints opened, and after 30 years, people were able to cross to the other side, the Turkish Cyprus, to go and visit. Now visit, it's their homes, you know. Their homes in the south, and the Greek Cypriot displaced, both of them displaced, in the north. And amazing narratives came out, and stories and so on, for weeks and weeks. But what, in my experience, and also in the way I interviewed many people, was that an underlying, okay, pain was there, the loss was there, memories restructured and reconnecting, but also new ones being formed through new relationships. An underlying relational empathy started building up. However, I wrote an article about this in a journal. This was, for me, a revolution from below at that time. However, the leaders on both sides and the political elites did not look at this as an opportunity to really embrace this societal need to meet the other, to go to their homes, and to process what was happening. Instead, they started politicizing these crossings by saying, oh, you cross there, you go to the enemy, and you buy water, and you buy food, and you reinforce the Turkish army and the economy, which was completely lies. You know, it wasn't going on there, etc. So unfortunately, in my view, we missed another big opportunity for reconciliation from below. There are, I mean, in those early years, more than 1.5 million people crossed on both sides, which is a big number for Cyprus, you know. And some people would cross very often. And of course, today, there is a very constant number of people who cross, and they do work there, and many Turkish Cypriots come and work in the south, use the health services, etc. But this could have really been a big opportunity to broaden, you know, the space for reconciliation and so on. So all these dialogues, and finally, I'm very much interested in the arts, and especially literature and the drama and so on. My first degree actually in England was a BA in English literature, and I cannot write anything without bringing in the literary, you know, lens. So Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots and Armenians and others, they wrote a lot at that time, you know. So every moment that was giving us an opportunity either for a new hope or a shift in our understanding and so on, was then transformed into a poem, into a play, etc. And there have been a number of very good plays by Turkish Cypriots performed in the south and Greek Cypriot plays performed in the north. Of course, the language is a problem, but we have the subtitles, okay, in each other's language and so on. So in the chapter, I quote one poem by Mehmet Yashin, who is one of my favorite poets, and his sister. They come from a very literary family in Cyprus. And he wrote this poem before the opening of the checkpoint. And that was when Turkish Cypriots were given Greek Cypriot homes to settle there. So they come into contact with the people's, with the owners' own material objects. And very often the photographs. Greek Cypriots take a lot of photographs because they have these albums and stories and so on in times of celebration to look at them and explain and relate stories. So in this poem, Mehmet Yashin, as I said before the crowing, it says, I would just read 3 lines. If I could only meet you one day, and I would be so happy, ever so happy. I'm keeping all your photographs, little girl. Here is your birthday under the mandarin tree, the cake with the 3 candles, you in the sea with Donald Duck. So he's going through the album and seeing all the different life moments of this family and especially of this child. And afterwards, of course, this was written in 2000. 3 years later, the family visited the house, and there was a story on the Greek TV when the family gets the album of the stories. I mean, you have similar things, I'm sure, in that. And the other thing was, the other poem I cite was from an Armenian, very good poet and friend, and so on. And that's what, when she knocked at her door in her own house, and she writes, I knocked at the door, which a woman opened. She said in Turkish, come in, welcome. Hoş geldiniz, hoş geldiniz. She handed an album of photos at me. My husband, our children, our house, pre-1974. The blue album, my living room. I kept these for you, she said, and goes on. And in the end, you know, she finishes by saying, so who is the guest and who is the visitor here? Who is the owner and who is the guest? But she finishes with the phrase, don't forget. So the pain is still there, but it's a new reality, you know, a new connection, a new relationship, and so on. So I think I will stop here and we can continue. Okay, Tamra?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. Appreciate this, very rich. And I look forward to our having a longer discussion with everyone online here. So, but before we do, I'm going to turn it over to our discussants, Max Lakitsch. Max, maybe you can just introduce yourself. I know many people already know who you are, but just for anybody that doesn't. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tamra. Just shortly, my name is Maximilian Lakitsch. I work as a postdoc lecturer at the Department of Global Governance at the Law Faculty at the University of Graz. And I do peace research and international relations. And I'm now happy to discuss what Maria told us. That was very, very fascinating and catching especially since you started with your personal account and your own entanglement into the whole situation, and describe what is often called peace practitioner, how peace practitioners are being made. So this entwinement of being a researcher, a PhD researcher in your case, and getting to know this not only theoretically interesting toolbox of interactive conflict resolution, but also practically relevant, which in your case opened some doors in order to engage with the situation in Cyprus. So you described your personal approach here as being based on personal narratives as part of the collective narratives, and if I understood you correctly, you've focused on personal narratives that can create collective narratives that can indeed challenge collective narratives that are relevant for fragmenting a society, but in your case, this counter narratives more or less sought to establish more interrelations that could eventually lead to reconciliation. You described these collective narratives as political, and as such, they could be made relevant also for politics. But you described the initiatives that you were involved in, more or less civil society initiatives, if I could guess, and you described them also as dangerous because they were really often against the official policy of the two states and other interests of international actors. But along your approach, you tried to transform this conflict system into a peace system, also by opening spaces to meet and produce new ideas, focusing on perspectives. You said first that you looked very much into the situation in Cyprus and started this process where you try to work on specifying the tool of reconciliation for the situation in Cyprus, how it was applied in other contexts, and in which ways it could fit for the case of Cyprus. So you focused here on measures from below, with a focus on dealing with the past. Also, the specific situation, as you described it, is kind of a long-term process, as it is also envisioned with Lederach. You described that it's now the third generation, and there have already been some success stories, especially in those 3 years from 2015 to 2017, where something happened that you described as an ideal situation, where the elite opens up to the grassroots and the grassroots open up to the elite, and out comes outcome statements that foster some kind of dynamics towards reconciliation, where also framings appeared about specific events that actually had divided both groups, were reframed in a way to actually foster reconciliation. So I did not exactly get it, but that would afterwards also be my question then also. So in this kind of favorable climate for reconciliation, you kind of had your groups that worked from the part of the civil society aligned with the official state-led process, and you kind of added certain information, or you found conclusions in order to support this process from the perspective of the civil society, which was, for example, to develop new narratives of coexistence, further confidence building measures like more crossing points, practical issues like common electricity and telephone, lines, but also a gender equality committee that you were involved more, that produced a lot of work that added to the negotiation process, also technical committees of culture, and all that fostered something that you call the human infrastructure to support peace in this reconciliation process. And if I understood you correctly, it was kind of it was kind of an optimistic, partly in some kind of way, optimistic conclusion that you had, in a way that it seemed that what you had done also contributed to a process that fostered the creation of more interrelationships between both communities, fostered empathy, and in some ways also aligned with this process of exchange between both groups. So my questions now would be, how would you see the relationship of the civil society work that you were involved in relation to the official political process? Were there official overlappings or unofficial overlappings? Did it lead directly to recognition from the decision maker level, or also indirectly? This would be the first question. Other question. Actually, I have really a lot of questions, but besides this one question, let me just ask another question, which struck me as really important regarding the issue of in the realm of the anti-imperialist criticism towards international peace practice, where you said that you looked carefully into how reconciliation is done in other contexts, such as Rwanda, and then carefully thought how to adapt that for the local context of Cyprus. Do you think that this should or could be done in other contexts as well? And would it then eventually lead to better outcomes? Because in your case, Cyprus is being part of the global north with a certain compatibility or proximity to these kinds of academic concepts. Was it way easier for you than for other communities in order to adapt such a universalist conception to your concepts?
Yeah. Hey, shall I answer, Tamra, or more questions?
I think in this case, since Max is the discussant, why don't you go ahead and have a little conversation with Max, and then we'll open it up wider for questions.
Okay. Now, with regard to whether we didn't quite compete with the officials or the political elites as such. But what we came to do was to add and complement, and integrate new information that would come either from our contacts with each other, through the processes at the workshops or in projects and so on. Because after every project, we produce recommendations and also new ideas, which we then transferred to the stakeholders, to the international community that was involved in the negotiations, which was much more appreciated there than was appreciated by the leaders themselves. Okay? So it wasn't that those who viewed us as a threat, it was in our different definitions of the problem. Okay, for us it was both a societal problem, but also an international one. And where we could work was at the societal level, because as Saunders told us, some things governments can do and other things citizens can do even better. So that's where we focus, how from below we can produce these new realities that the macro level, the decision makers, were not really very much interested in, okay? And because they looked at the problem from a legal aspect, they looked at the problem from a strategic aspect, they looked at the problem from a boundary, you know, percentages of territories, etc. So we wanted this perspective of the reality that is happening around us be also integrated at that level, which had to do with people's fears, which had to do with people's daily concerns, everydayness. So people, you know, the everydayness of peace was very important in this process to discover, you know, this new information. So that's number one. And then the technical committees, yes, they were established by the leaders, but they gave us sometimes some mandate which would restrict us from going out into the grassroots to talk about what we have produced and what we have given to the negotiators, because they said you work for us and this information should stay there. And this was frustrating for us. And that's what, you know, I became very critical of these restrictions, you know. But on the other hand, some of the work, especially of education, went public, and that was very good, especially with training of teachers, multiple perspectives of history, and also of the material that they were producing. Now, with regard to the relationship of civil society and the overlapping and the impact, I must say that the work that has been produced at the societal level, at the micro level, is enormous. I mean, I can write encyclopedias. So much is the production there. And the question is why the impact that we had hoped would bring about was very limited. So it has to do with political culture. It has to do with the lack of linkages. And also it has to do with the different political parties and how they view this kind of information, which whether it meets their interests or it doesn't. So it wasn't this holistic understanding of the of the societal transformation that was happening, you know, there. And so this is our frustration. Number three, the impact was limited because as time went by, like today, we have fragmentation. NGO here, another group there, another organization here, and so on. And very often, this fragmentation limits our influence, our power. And the one is not really informed about what the other is really doing. So to join forces. So what we realized that, and now what we are doing, actually next week, I'm invited to a big meeting where we bring all this work together, all these NGOs and so on, and develop an overarching forum with the shared agenda of the peace building, of reconciliation, and of an action plan so that we increase our impact and not being pieces. Like my group as women, we did a lot of work, but it didn't also spread out into many of the women's other groups. So we started going to, that's why in the last 3 years, we started going to the grassroots, you know, to women's organizations in the grassroots and learning from them, you know, what's going on with regard to the gender inequality issues there, to the impact of the conflict, to violence, etc. So these were, I think, issues that we need to reflect more about and understand that all this work that was produced there needs to be disseminated and publicly discussed, instead of leaving it into a more elitist kind of environment in our universities, in our research centers, or in our conferences, and so on. So that's our challenge now, to do that. I hope I answered this one. Yes. So yeah, about reconciliation, as I mentioned, you know, we don't want to copy other countries' models or tools, because what came out, although now there's a group in Cyprus that is talking about establishing a reconciliation and truth, they don't call it commission, they call it center or something. Actually, in the Annan plan, in the peace plan of 2004, there was a mention of a reconciliation commission. But funnily enough, none of the leaders or political parties took it up in their campaign, you know, and in their information campaign to outside to the people. Personally, I believe what's really the biggest hindrance here is the grievances from the past and the asymmetries, economic asymmetry, infrastructure asymmetries that developed over the years and were never addressed. And the other thing is the trauma. The missing persons on both sides is the trauma of loss, beloveds, not knowing where they're buried still. So these are issues, I think, that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission cannot address. We need interventions that can be both by the internationals to help the locals, you know, activate processes for investigating this kind of needs and reconciliation issues. It will take a long time. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. And I'm going to suggest that if people have questions, they go ahead and raise their electronic hands, or you can also put your questions into the chat and we'll monitor that. So while people are doing that, I would also like to ask a couple of quick questions. So building a bit on this last conversation, or actually the one, right, the question before the last one, I think one of the things that your chapter and your talk really illustrate well is the importance of linkages and the importance of creating connections, both, as we would talk about in the kind of letter accents, both vertically across levels between grassroots and leadership, but also horizontally between different organizations and initiatives that are going on at the same level, right? And I guess I was partly hearing you say that maybe some of the periods when things were most successful in moving towards peace in Cyprus was when those linkages were very much being fostered. And I'm excited to hear that you now are perhaps headed in that direction as well, that there's been a conscious attempt to try to bring the different organizations together that are working in this space to kind of counter, once again, the narrative, whatever narratives are out there that are counter to peace. And so one of the other things that this also highlights for me that I wanted to ask you about was timing. So we have linkages and we have timing, and it feels like you know, it reminds me a little bit when we talk about the public policy process and how when there's both the identification of issues and there's also the timing politically when the opportunity is there, right? And that in a sense maybe much of what you are needing to do is both cultivate these linkages and cultivate awareness, and also work on the political side at the you know, more elite official level to push for openings, so that then at some point there's an opening that aligns between what the official leadership is open to doing and what has been going on at the civil society level and the grassroots level, and the kinds of linkages that have been made there, to then allow for something like the very powerful example that you raised of the two leaders on each side walking together and making public statements about how important it was to work together. I mean, how do you cultivate those different aspects so that then the timing, or maybe the question is, how do you shift the timing, right? How do you create the readiness? It's almost like ripeness and readiness stuff, right, in the literature on this, for these different streams to come together.
Yes, what we noticed, and I mentioned it, I think, is that when there is a movement at the official level, you know, at the macro level, this task becomes so much easier, you know, to bring together also the civil society, all these different groups, you know, even business groups get activated very much. Those at that moment when the timing is, there is an opening here, the negotiations, so let's have more business ventures together and so on. And so both the environment of with some movement at the negotiations and the timing would facilitate opening spaces for the civil society groups and, as I said, all the other tracks to join in. So what we notice also is the opposite. When there is stagnation at the negotiation level, you know, people become very not only disappointed and frustrated, but they say they're tired. What's the point? You know? So we've got to reckon with this kind of, yeah, I would call it tiredness, but also people lose faith. So we need to go back again and rekindle that in situations like this, we need to be much more active so that we can push from below. However, this pushing from below is not easy, because when you have opposing positions and the two leaders are completely on separate camps, and there is nothing there to bring them together, even to have a cup of coffee, then people are much more reluctant to engage. So many of us who don't see any other option, we continue. But those, that we would like to be in, when I call them or other colleagues and so on of mine, say, what's the point? Call me when there is something specific to do. So yeah, both the timing, the readiness, and the stagnation, and the possibility for talks are all factors that can really mobilize what we said before, this conflict system, and to start moving. So personally, I'm very, yeah.
Yeah. So just as a follow-up to that, and this point that you're saying about, and I'm glad you brought in the notion of this being a system, right? That there's a certain inertia or inclination towards a kind of equilibrium that makes it difficult to shift, right? And that the reinforcing factors that keep it at that equilibrium, that's something that we've talked about in some of the other sessions. But then something might shift in the environment. And you raised that, I think, that what happened before these two leaders started to, well, there was a new election. I know that was part of it, right? There was a new leader on the Turkish Cypriot side. But even before that, correct me if I'm wrong, the opening up of the border changed. And so you have this critical environmental shift that then changed the dynamics within the system. How did that happen?
You mean how did the green line opened at that
What
point?
led to that?
Yeah, I think we have to understand that the Turkish Cypriot civil society was much more vibrant than the Greek Cypriot, because we are independent, we are recognized internationally, and we are open to the world. 2004, we became member of the European Union, and so on. So the situation in the Turkish Cypriot community was very oppressive, was very restrictive, was very limiting for opportunities and so on. So the Turkish Cypriots and many of the groups that were in bicommunal work, and this I think we should give credit to the impact that we've had at that time, came out into the streets demonstrating. They formed a big forum, which they called Solution Now, and they called upon their leader, either you solve the problem and you sit at the negotiation, or you resign, okay? And within a few months, they had elections, and he was defeated out. So they had a leftist leader who was pro-solution, okay, and could sit with the Greek Cypriot leader. So yes, you're right about these shifts that can happen in the environment and provide opportunities. And the other thing is that after the Turkish Cypriots voted yes for the Annan Plan, everybody knows the Annan Plan was a UN peace plan that was given to both communities, having worked on it by the leaders and other stakeholders, Greece and Turkey, and the US was for it, and Britain, and so on, and was, however, defeated in the Greek Cypriot community, voted by 67% the Turkish Cypriot community for different reasons, and the Greek Cypriots, why? Because we were for a solution. How did we vote that? Because we had a change of leadership. They had a change of leadership pro-solution. We had a change of leadership which was against the federal system and against the negotiations for a communal bizonal federation. So this was now on the side of the Turkish Cypriot community, feeling very frustrated, very angry at us. How do you say that you want a solution, but you voted like this? I mean, I had even Turkish Cypriot friends that I worked with for 20 years, 30 years, and they were attacked by their neighbors, Turkish Cypriot, saying, "Are these the people you want to work with and you want to live with? They don't want us, understand?" So it was a period now also of a lot of regression, a lot of oppression. I mean, not oppression, what's the word? Yeah, it was, I mean, when I think about it, I tremble. It was very, very bad situation. And then in the Greek Cypriot community, there was polarization after this. So we had to reckon with that. Those 25%, 24% that we voted yes, we were very badly viewed and perceived by the patriotic ones who voted no against the plan. So we needed to reckon with that as well. We were labeled all kinds of names. I was called 3 times. I mean, impacted our personal life, my kids and I was called to 3 times by the Ethics Committee in the House of Parliament were accused of getting money from UNDP to promote the yes vote. And I told them, I never got a penny. You know, this is what I felt it was my democratic right to say, yes, I agree, because a new possibility. It's a new opening for us. No, they insisted and insisted. They asked the university to look into my character and my whatever. And then they called me back twice, another time. And I told them, look, this is the proposal for a gender, project that I submitted to the UNDP for $23,000 for a research, but I didn't get it. Here is the letter. So you can see the paranoia that went on after that.
Yeah.
And what do we do? My question to all of us is, what do we do in situations like today where the climate, is very depressing? We don't see openings. The internationals are trying, but there's a war nearby, and there's another war further down. So the civil society, I tell them it's our opportunity now to really make our voice heard and bring out the need for solution, for breaking the deadlock. And they tell me you're too romantic. You're too idealistic.
It sounds very difficult. It doesn't sound romantic. It sounds very difficult. But you're arguing for civil society to this is the opportunity or the demand for civil society to take it up again and move once more and try to shift whatever it can shift, right?
Yes.
So what other questions do people have? Those in the audience.
Maybe it was boring.
No, not at all. I think both Max and I have more questions, but I want to give people a chance, other people a chance as well.
Yeah, it would be lovely.
Good. We have Jack Porter.
Some of the
Thank you.
students.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Jack Porter. I'm a master's student in Leipzig in Germany, and I'm writing my thesis about Turkish Cypriots and how they view the European Union.
Okay.
So yeah, my question to you is kind of how do you see the EU's role in the Cyprus problem, and what kind of efforts can they play to come to a solution? It's obviously a very difficult situation, given that one of the parties is a member. which can be, many people see as a shame, I think, and it kind of limits the position of the EU. So yeah, I'd like to see your perspective on that. Thank you.
Okay, now with regard to the EU, yes, we joined in a day after the referendum, 1st of May, or a week, sorry, I get mixed up. A week, May 1st. Okay, now it's 20 years. May 1st, we celebrated many anniversaries. 60 years of the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus, the longest, I think, in many countries, maybe one more in Korea or whatever. We celebrated 50 years of the invasion or the peace operation. We celebrate 20 years of EU. So what do we celebrate and who is celebrating? Can the one side celebrate while the other side is excluded? So this is a big issue. I mean, it's an issue, it's a problem. Now, with me, what I had hoped with the EU is that we would really use what EU represents for in terms of value and democratic processes in our everyday life, in our institutions, in our relationships, and so on. We didn't. We only focused on that they will help us on the political level, which the EU says this is your problem, you know. We can be observers, we can be on the side, but it's not for us to solve it for you, which was the misperception originally of the Greek Cypriot leader. We get into the EU and we get a better deal, you know. So this never happened. So misperception there. On the other hand, the Turkish Cypriots are considered, Jack, to be citizens of the Republic, which means that they have the same rights towards the EU or from EU like the Greek Cypriots. So many, in order to do that, they applied for their for a passport, a Cyprus Republic passport, or an ID, you know, for their ID. And with this, they can travel all over the EU countries, okay, or also anywhere. The other thing that this gave them some privileges was to be able to use the facilities in the south, for instance, in the hospitals or in some of the jobs, etc., applying for jobs, or in the university, you know, although still the language is a problem. So there is the Green Line trade, which was one of the things that the Turkish Cypriots and EU also offered, and the Greek Cypriots accepted. That is from the Green Line to pass products that are produced in the north to the south, or from the south to the north, like building materials or other things. Today, however, the north, in terms of trade, has to go everything through Turkey. Okay, so this was something that restricted the development in the north. And of course, the Turkish Cypriots now are demanding that this isolation that was imposed because of the illegal declaration of state there, which is recognized only by Turkey, should be lifted and should have much more flights from abroad and so on. But the Greek Cypriot leadership and the Cyprus Republic say no, because this is our only card that we have. And if we do that, it means in their perception that it would be meaning recognition of an illegal entity, etc. So that is the situation with the EU. The other thing I forgot, the EU have opened an office in the north, and every year they give 234 or so million euro for infrastructure, for peace building, for contacts, and so on. And that has been really very good because they used a lot of that money for culture and reconstruction of historical buildings and other things. But it was a big mistake. I think the EU should have demanded a solution before we entered, and not enter as a divided city, divided country.
It's very interesting hearing about these adjustments, these changes in other aspects of the larger relationships and how those continue to impact the relationship between the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots. Another thing you spoke to earlier in the presentation was the difference between the way the conflict is viewed internationally versus those within the society. And that, in a sense, I really appreciated you talking about that as two different definitions of the problem, and how it's important to not just look at the international community's definition of the problem, or perhaps the diaspora's definition of the problem, but what is the definition of the problem within the society, right? So I have a related question, and that is, are there intergenerational differences? And in fact, how is the profile or the dynamics of the conflict shifting as the generations shift?
Yes. Well, again, I go back to my own experience. My parents were very rooted in their land, in their house, in their trees, in their everything. Although my father was a busy man in Nicosia, in the capital, he felt he belonged there. So I have many memories. I was born there, but brought up in Nicosia, in the city. But we would go back, summer, holidays, everything. So my attachment there is different from my parents. And my children, much less. I took them there. They saw the house I was born and so on. And I cried. They embraced me. They hugged me. But that was it. They will not go back. They will not claim it once I'm dead. I hope not soon. And but what I'm saying is that with the youth, it can go both directions. It can be mobilized by political party elites, okay? Don't forget, these are your lands, and they teach about this in schools, they teach and so on. The reality outside is very different. And as time goes by, people become very much used to the division, I must say. And this is the big problem as well. In some of the research we did with SEED and other organizations, we found that the young people and the women were more resistant to coexistence because they had no idea of the other, who this other is. How can I live with somebody I don't know? They were telling me. And the women, also the young women, they say, okay, if I meet them, what do I tell them? How do I remember, Tamra, one of the workshops in the buffer zone 21 years old Turkish Cypriot girl came to me and said, "Can I touch you?" I said, "Yes, of course." "But why?" "Just to see you're human like me," she said to me. So you see how we view who this other is. And once you meet it, you want to ascertain, to make sure he's living. It's not just a demon, So there is a lot of work to be done there. So yes, the intergenerational transfer can become very rhetorically nationalistic, but also it can become apathetic. And this apathy is now being raised because we have Euro elections. Everybody needs to go and vote. So it's complex, as we are talking about complexity, again, multiple levels and realities and so on. And once grandmothers are dead who recite all the stories and the trauma and the losses and and their dignity being attacked and so on, I think the present generation, my children's generation and their friends, they discuss it in a very, like, okay, so we can move anywhere we want. Now we go to the other side of the island and etc. We have our tablets, we have, social media. So there is apathy, yeah. And there is more to that. However, there's also a group of young people on both sides who are doing music together. They have their own bands and groups and play all over the island. We have environmental groups because today the environment on both sides, on the mountains, in the sea, and also in very selected areas, they need to be cleaned, they need to be preserved, and so on. So there is many groups now and that work with organizations on both sides, and they get funding from internationals, etc. And the arts as well, they do exhibitions together. So the new community want to be creative. They don't want to indulge in the misery of the trauma that the previous generations have created. That's the other part. And there are some more that I really admire, in the sense that they go to villages and they write down the music as it was, generations before, and they produce, CDs, etc. So, yeah.
Good. Well, that's very interesting. So I know I had a question. Is it Mehi? Mehi, did you want to go ahead and ask a question?
Mehi.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mehiddin Sutia, and I do a master in social pedagogic, I think. I don't know how to say that in English. Anyway, I have just a question. How does look the solution like, or what are the basic elements for the solution? Because you mentioned many times about the solution, but what do you think most important are to do in this situation? I would like to know.
The solution that's been discussed for generations now, for the last 45 years. Is it my?
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know what happened suddenly.
You have to turn the volume a little bit down.
Max, is it my?
Yes, the volume is too loud. I think your volume is too loud.
No, my phone is. Anyway, the motto that has been proposed in the bicommunal bizonal federation, which means that
Maria,
Yeah.
can you turn your volume down? We can hear you and me very loudly.
where is the my
It's echoing through Mehi. It's not Maria.
Oh yeah.
Mehi needs to mute himself.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what has been discussed for the last 40 years is the establishment of a federal system, but in a bizonal, bicommunal, which means that we have the federal government, okay, where both communities will be cooperating or working, and we have a federal parliament or senate, and we have two zones, which we call constituent states, okay? Which today, the constituent state in the north is about 34% of the territory, which is over too much for the population ratio. So in the negotiations, they agreed to 28.6, or sometimes they go to 29. So this is going to be the Turkish Cypriot constituent state. And in the south, it will be the Greek Cypriot constituent state. Each state, we will have a federal constitution like you have in the United States or in other federal systems, where, and then each constituent state will have also its own constitutions. But what will be the powers of the federal constitution and the constituent states, they do not have to compete, you know. I'm speaking very, very simply now. But what I'm saying is that this system, they felt, those who accepted it, both sides, and with the UN, felt that it meets the needs of both communities, the need for autonomy and the need for cooperation, okay? So certain things will be common. There will be also free movement of goods and of people and so on. But there will be some restrictions. I cannot go as a Greek Cypriot refugees by thousands and settle in the Turkish Cypriot community, because that might change the demographics of, and the Turkish Cypriots should be the majority in their own state, as the Greek Cypriots and so on. So the competencies of the states would be on issues of culture, issues of development, local development, education, health, local taxes, and so on. And then they will also be some competencies at the federal level where both citizens of the constituent states will be benefiting as well, and will have rights to elect their leaders, to elect their members. And we were talking about having joint ballots, you know, the same ballot, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots candidates, so that gradually we have integrative kind of system and not separatist as it was in the Constitution of 1960. So this is the kind of system of solution that the majority of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots today espouse. But their leadership, as I said, insists for a two-state solution, which is partition, you know.
thank you. Maria, Mehi, did you have a follow-up, or is that, did that answer your question?
It's all right. Thank you very much. It's okay.
Good. Well, let me ask you all to join me in thanking our speaker today for a very rich and provocative. I know I've got lots of things I'd like to think about, and especially thinking about some of the things you're talking about and how they also reflect dynamics in other protracted conflicts, and how we might use lessons to think about how to go forward in some of those as well. So I thank you so much for your contributions today. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. I have to reflect on a number of things too, and that's how we co-learn, you know?
Yes, that is. I'll just say again that
So come
my
to Cyprus,
understanding,
please.
Max,
Max, come to Cyprus.
yes. And Max, there's no session next week, right? Next week there's no session. The next session is on the 27th of May.
Next week is holiday, and in 2 weeks.
Okay. 27th, right.
The 27th is a holiday for us, but we'll still be here.
Oh, so not for us. Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely Eurocentric.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
Maria. Thanks, Tamra. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.